What's up, everyone? I really wanted to make this video today because I want to know if other people out there are feeling the exact same way and if people are feeling out of touch with reality here in the United States. For anyone who's really just paying attention in general, we can clearly see that our nation is not on the path that it should be on. Um, so, when I really look at the bigger picture, I've been studying this for give or take almost 10 years now, since 2016. Specifically the demise of the United States, looking at a range of factors. And every time I answer a question, it leaves me with another question, and it repeats the same process over and over again. What I really when I started out looking into what was happening here in the United States and what I thought the eventual demise would be, I thought that we would eventually unravel. When I first started, we would start unraveling into like mass chaos, a crazy civil war style event. But the more I learned, the more I realized that something like that, while still possible, is highly unlikely in terms of something like an American Civil War 1860s style conflict. While we can't rule out a conflict like something that Northern Ireland experienced with the Troubles, which is probably the most likely scenario that we will see here. What it really begs to differ is that what is happening. Just aside from the political part, because I tend to jump around a lot, and I really want to know, like, do people see the same signs that I'm seeing? Um, and how are y'all feeling? I want to know if other people are stressed out, if other people are struggling, if other people see the path that we're taking as a nation the exact same way. So, we have, depending on if you believe the government statistics or not, they say 600,000, but I think it's closer to 1 million people that are living in homelessness in this country. That doesn't count the 3 to 4 million people that are living in their cars, RVs, temporary shelters, living on the couch of a friend or family member. And it does not, really take into effect specifically children, considering that 25% of American children are living in poverty. Tens of millions of Americans rely on SNAP benefits in order to feed themselves and their families, and that depending on at certain points during the past 5 years, from the pandemic to now, and depending on the study, they range drastically, but anywhere between, and don't quote me on this, 50 to 78% of Americans, somewhere in that range, are living paycheck to paycheck, struggling to get by to the next week. Americans are fed up, they're stressed out, they're angry, they're depressed, they have just had enough. And when you really look at that, and you can only just imagine, how much longer can our nation continue to exist in this current state before something erupts. And as I had touched on earlier, I don't see that kind of culminating in a 1860s style civil war, but I do see this culminating, a culmination of, again, something like we saw in Northern Ireland with the Troubles, where you kind of already have some similarities happening here, political assassinations and politically motivated shootings, and of course militia groups as well, that kind of mirror the IRA in Ireland as well. But, really what concerns me is that, our federal government seems like they are checked out of reality. Now, our federal government, specifically in Congress, the senators and the congressmen and women, there's a grand majority of them are well off, you could say, compared to the average American. Um, they do not know how the average American struggles to get by every single day. Like everyone here in this country, except for maybe the top 10-15% of Americans that have some sort of economic wealth and fallback. The rest of the country, the other 85%, just is in survival mode. And I don't think that Congress can relate to that, nor do they understand. They continue to make reckless decisions. They continue to leave the national debt, continuing to let it grow higher and higher. I mean, we're 40 trillion is within reach. The deficit is around 1.9 trillion, close to 2 trillion. Still leaving it unchecked. And they make these little cuts here and there, like Doge had done, but they're really not addressing the significant problems that there needs to be a large amount of revenue that can cover where the gap is, and whether or not that is increasing taxes on businesses, corporations, whether or not that's increasing taxes on extremely wealthy individuals. I mean, there's a lot of areas that can be covered, but again, that's not up to us. That's up to the people that we elect and the people that we trust to do a job that we expect is at least the best that they can do, which is anything but. So, with that, being spoken, it's like, really, what is going on here? And, as I had mentioned earlier, with the homelessness population, people, going unhoused, it's also tying into, like, the social aspects of society. We also have a large drug problem in the United States with narcotics, and addiction rates and drug overdoses. There's, again, in the past 5-10 years, it's been highest they've ever been in the country's history. We also have a significant problem with the gun violence and mass shootings that continue to rise in this country. Mental health problems in this country are just have exploded, and their solution is to just continue to dish out more and more prescription medications and just medicate the population to take the population away from what the real problem is. Is that the problem is that this country has been mismanaged and has been betrayed by the very same people that we have elected to lead us. So it begs the question, we may hear from the media, the pundits on the media, we may hear from the politicians in the Trump administration and even previously the Biden administration that everything's okay. American economy is as great as it's ever been. But is it really doing as great as they say they are for everybody? Because, this is the point of, making sure that the economy is functioning and growing. It is supposed to work for everybody, not just if the big corporations in the top 5-10% wealthiest Americans are growing their assets, because that's what these people seem to focus on. They don't seem to focus on the rest of the population. As long as the billionaires and the multimillionaires and these corporations continue to grow their wealth, that is a good sign that the American economy is doing well, and everyone else seems to get left behind. There is tens of millions of Americans in all over from coast to coast, especially in high tax states, California, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, where I am, that are struggling just to put food on the table and pay basic everyday expenses like rent and utilities. And with that, you see a rise where people have to forego doing things such as, paying certain bills like car insurance, or they have to forego registering their cars, which, in my state, there's a significant problem where, you know, in my city alone, there's been an estimate that anywhere between 25 to 45% of drivers in this city, they don't have insurance or registration on their car. They're driving around because they cannot afford it. I mean, given that if people could afford it, I'm sure they would have no problem registering their cars or providing insurance. But insurance has become a scam. They take advantage of individuals who cannot afford that insurance. I'm not talking about drivers who've been in 10 accidents. When we talk about car insurance specifically here, I'm talking about just drivers, young drivers, elderly drivers that have been driving, some of them, 10, 20, 30 years, but they're having to pay hundreds of dollars a month. They cannot afford that when in our area, in the New York City metropolitan area, a studio apartment in a decent neighborhood is sometimes over $2,000 a month. And the wages are stagnant in this country. They aren't growing. There's still states that are, stuck with single-digit minimum wages. So again, what is going on and what gives? Because these politicians and the media and the rich people in society cannot continue to expect the country to function the way it is, go in another 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and nothing becomes of it. And of course, individuals such as myself who not only have gone to college and have attempted to build an American dream for myself by building a business, by contributing to society, by paying taxes. Why should an individual like me, who's not rich, but who's not in dire poverty, continue to stay in a country where I know I have to continue to work even harder and harder each given day, knowing that, inflation will be persistent. If I save money today in my bank account, it's not going to go anywhere. I'm supposed to sit here and just put money away. I'm supposed to sit here and, continue to worry that if, since I'm running a business and if I get sick and, I can't work for a week, that I can't afford to pay, health care for myself, or I can't afford to pay my bills. The country is out of control. And not even, healthcare is another discussion. Aside, I don't want to really mix politics into this discussion, but anyone who does not believe that a taxpayer-funded healthcare system should be implemented is, I don't know. I don't understand where your line of thinking comes from. There's so many people in this country, that rely on programs like Medicaid. And I understand there are people that maybe abuse the system. But look at countries in Europe and how more advanced they are in terms of their health care for their individual populations versus us. So, it just begs to differ. Pay healthcare that you have to pay for, and then going to an emergency room and spending $3,000, spending $500 for an ambulance ride. All of these prices are pushed up in order for these companies to make more money. And if you support a system like that, I don't know where your line of thinking comes from, but I think you really need to think about it and really consider if that's fair or not. And especially somebody who's, for example, if you have cancer, if you're in the hospital for a month because of a serious emergency, and then you walk out and you get a $500,000, $1 million hospital bill, do you think that that's fair that somebody should go bankrupt in order to just have to literally get care to survive? I don't understand where Republicans come up with that line of thinking. I will probably never understand. If someone wants to have a discussion about that or has any answer for me, I'd love to hear it, but I never could wrap my head around that. But that's as political as I'll keep it, because regardless, there are people on both sides of the political aisle that are struggling just as much as anyone else. And really, we should be working together. We should not be fighting one another, because the real enemy are the people in Washington, D.C. that are making these decisions that are affecting our lives and in the most negative way possible. But, of course, the people that will disagree with me, and there's people that will agree with me, and that's just how things are. It's a healthy discourse, and it's always everyone has their own opinions. But I don't think that any of us can argue that the state of our nation is not in good health. The country is very sick, and if we don't step up to the plate now and work together as a nation, there's very little that we will be able to do. I mean, right now, economically speaking, in terms of the health, the financial health of our country, there's very little we can do in paying down the national debt and resolving the deficit without severe austerity measures, likely, because I just don't see taxes being, raised on large corporations. So of course, it's a very, very difficult conversation to have there, and there will be a lot of cuts, and a lot of people will suffer because of it. Whether or not healthcare cuts are made, whether or not services, as I had mentioned previously, with SNAP program. I mean, any kind of cuts will just devastate people all across the board. But yeah, I mean, it's very difficult. We just came out of the longest government shutdown that we ever had, which kind of gives a little bit of kind of trying to figure out the word here. I think sometimes I talk too much and I lose my train of thought. But the government shutdown that we literally just got out of, it was literally like a telltale sign of how divided we are politically as a nation. And the administration and any other administration, presidential administration that comes in the future, is unlikely to be able to solve the problem. But clearly, the Biden administration didn't solve the problem. They lied to many people, young people especially, telling them that they were going to help them with their student loans, and they left them hanging. The millions of Americans are now, still burdened with these massive student loans. And we can't really judge younger generations, because people have to understand that many schools do not provide financial literacy, and many schools do not even help children to kind of and guide them through the process properly in applying for college. I can testify to that because I did everything myself, and luckily I kept my debt to a minimum. But there were many schools in this country, public schools specifically, that they leave the children all out on their own, and they do not help them through the process. And if you're not financially educated, I mean, you can't expect a 17-year-old to really know too much to begin with in terms of finance. So, for older generations to judge and judge young people, oh, you shouldn't have done this, and you shouldn't have gone to college, and you should have gone to trade school, and you shouldn't take on this debt. It's pretty asinine, the things that I hear. But, again, everyone can judge anyone. We all have these notions in our head that we kind of know what we think. We think we know everything sometimes, and it's perfectly fine. We're human beings. But, specifically what I really want to kind of get at is that, going back to the beginning, what is going on here? Because I mean, it's pretty crazy. Like, I just don't think that many people in this country comprehend to that extent what exactly the problems are and how bad they are. That's essentially why I'm in my personal 5-year plan to move out of the United States, because I just don't see a future here. Excuse me. So moving out of the United States is essentially the only possibility here, because our politicians have screwed us so badly. I mean, they're just it's impossible for this country. Maybe it is in 10, 20, 30, 40 years. Okay, maybe things will be different, but I don't have that kind of time. I have a family. I have people in my life. I have I'm 30 years old now. I'm not going to wait till I'm 40 to wait and see if the country gets better and the economy gets better. I don't have that kind of time. If I was 15 years old, maybe it'd be a little different, but I don't have that time. So, that's why I've decided, and now no other country is perfect. Don't get me wrong. I mean, there's bad things in every country. A lot of expats tend to go to places like Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, Mexico, some of the Caribbean islands, Dominican Republic, Colombia, Costa Rica, Brazil. Don't get me wrong, there's problems in all those countries. And sometimes those countries may have even, bigger problems in terms of poverty than here. But, you know, we have to just find like a middle ground and where you feel like you can go, to kind of escape all of the madness that is happening here in the United States. And I've made my choice. I know Brazil is far from perfect, but I feel like Brazil is a country that can offer not only some stability in terms of, Brazil is a large country. I mean, there's areas all throughout Brazil that one can go to. There's, of course, Rio de Janeiro may be like the Chicago of Brazil in terms of crime, but there's other places in Brazil that are good. And if you have U.S. dollars and a job and income sources from the United States to live in a country like Brazil or Costa Rica or Mexico, you can live relatively better than you can here. And why should I continue to go struggle paying, U.S. dollars 2,000 for a studio and like a mid building when I can live in a very luxurious neighborhood and probably pay $1,500 a month in place in Brazil or even less and get a 2-bedroom. So you got to think that things are significantly better in other countries if, again, you can have resources from the United States. And of course, the culture. United States, again, as I had mentioned earlier, people are extremely angry here. People are extremely bitter. The gun violence and mass shootings are out of control. People are just stressed. They're not friendly. They don't want any contact and communication with one another. You can't even have a conversation with people half the time out on the streets or in places because everyone is kind of so stuck up and just don't want to be bothered. Some of these other countries completely different. People are just outgoing, they're friendly. And you got to really find a place where you feel like you can live, because the United States you can't live. It's survival mode. Even if you make, 100K, 150K a year, you're still in survival mode because you just don't know, especially today with the layoffs that are going on here and I go out here. I went to Canada. I'll give you an example. A year ago, I was fine. I walked all throughout Montreal. No problem at all. Did not feel unsafe whatsoever. I come down to my own, there's a neighborhood in the city where I live. Pretty, upper middle class. It has sections that are relatively rich. I don't even feel safe without concealed carrying in that neighborhood. And that is a relatively good town. I don't feel safe anywhere in this country without concealed carrying. You just never know. I've been in situations in my life where I've had to almost use my concealed carry. I've been in situations when I was younger where I probably wish I would have had it. I've been in life or death situations. These situations can also happen anywhere, so don't just think that this is an American problem. They can happen in France, they can happen in Poland, they can happen in Costa Rica, it doesn't matter. But the fact that we are living in a society where you can't even go to the grocery store without worrying about someone coming in and shooting the place up, it's just not necessary. And I just cannot feel safe raising a family here in this country with these type of problems. And I'm from Connecticut. If anyone is familiar with Sandy Hook, I mean, you will know how dangerous and how crazy people are. And the gun laws, just because they ban assault rifles or just because they ban open carry, that does not stop a criminal. These politicians are so out of touch with reality. It's not even funny anymore. It's just people used to joke about these politicians, but these people are just so dead inside of their heads that it's just completely insane. But I know I've gotten a lot really jumped around to a few different topics, but I really, again, just want to get back to the main question because I can't even answer it because it's just so much. It's like so muddled. But like seriously, like what is going on here? Because it's just crazy. This country is just a ball of madness, and it is disintegrating more and more every progressing month before our eyes. And we're losing more and more freedoms here. More and more laws get passed, going all the way back to when the Patriot Act was first passed after 9/11. Our freedoms in this country are disintegrating before our eyes. It's no longer a free country. We are living in an age of authoritarianism, and not to mention, being an immigrant in this country is essentially been criminalized by the government. And I live in a city where ICE agents are pretty frequent here, and this is just something that mirrors a country that is riddled by internal conflict. And it's, again, this is not a country that I envisioned when I was 30 years old that would exist. And again, I know there's people on opposing sides with that issue. Do I support having violent criminals off the streets? Of course, but to have innocent families ripped apart is a completely different topic. And this country is no longer the country that existed when I was 15 years old. And maybe someone could go 100 years ago and say the same thing. I mean, this country has always had a history of problems. Whether or not we're talking about the civil rights movement, whether or not we're talking about the Civil War and slavery, it doesn't matter. This country has always experienced severe internal conflicts. It has always experienced oppression for specific groups within society. But things feel different this time, and it is mainly social and economic problems that have been caused by the political problems that we experience in DC, and it's just getting worse. And there's really no solution. I mean, we're, as individuals, something we could do. For those that don't know, I ran for Congress in the Connecticut's 4th Congressional District as an independent. I'm a Democrat, but I ran as an independent back 2024. So I was actually disqualified late on in the event. So luckily we got someone else take my place. Fortunately, he only garnered 2% of the vote. Probably would have done the same. Independents don't fare well when you have an incumbent with a lot of money behind them. That is from one of the wealthiest communities in the state, of course. It has a lot of people behind them, a lot of important people that is, and of course has been in power almost 20 years. So little you can do with that, but people have to stand up, and I did my try. I'm sure there's other great people that will come after me, especially this coming year, and I really hope so. But I got to think about myself. I got to think about my family, and all this craziness. I have to think about moving on, and that's where I decided that within the next 5 years, it is best for me to just leave the country and live as an expat. And, hopefully things change. I'm try to be an optimist, but, after 10 years of studying this, it sometimes studying until I have a headache, reading countless books from not only American authors, excuse me, but also Europeans that study issues. We're studying civil wars. They've studied internal conflicts. And while the United States mirrors many other basic traits that other conflicts have had, again, as I had mentioned previously, I do think that our country mirrors the troubles in Northern Ireland pretty good. And I do think that not only are we in specific stages of that conflict already, I do think that the next conflict in this country is coming, and it will look a lot different than in 1861, but it is coming, and our country it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And, it's kind of like how it was in the Great Depression with the economic fallout. It got really bad before it got any better. And it was really only World War II that kind of actually pulled the United States out of that depression. So we don't know where we're going into the future, but I do know that things are not good and we are being lied to. So I hope everybody, kind of takes that and really rides with it, and kind of, again, have a plan for yourself and your family, and definitely take it serious, because this is not a joke. But that's enough for today. I will leave y'all with that. It was great kind of just going over this, talking to everybody, but, got things to do. It's a busy day, and got to get to that. So until next time, and, all y'all take care, and, again, really look into what's going on, because things are getting crazy, and they are going to get a lot worse before they get any better.